The year is 1807. The world trembles. One man stands unrivaled, the architect of a new European order, Napoleon Bonaparte. He had crushed empires, redefined warfare, and brought the mighty Russian and Prussian forces to their knees at Friedland. The Treaty of Tilsit had just been signed. Napoleon was at the absolute zenith of his power, invincible, unbeatable. But even the Emperor of the French needed a moment of respite, a celebration worthy of his boundless success. He demanded a hunt, not just any hunt, but a spectacle, a magnificent display of imperial leisure. This hunt, however, would become immortalized, not in the annals of glory, but in the footnotes of farce. This is the true story of how Napoleon Bonaparte, the conqueror of continents, was decisively defeated by an army of small, furry creatures. The stage was set by Napoleon's chief of staff, Marshal Louis-Alexandre Berthier, a man renowned for his organizational genius in war.
Berthier's task: arrange the perfect rabbit shoot. The logistics had to be flawless.
He knew that the success of the imperial hunt depended on volume. The emperor must not be bored. Berthier thus dispatched his men to acquire thousands of quarry, a staggering requirement for a casual afternoon. The number cited by historians varies, but the consensus is enormous. Potentially 3,000 rabbits needed to be gathered. But in a catastrophic blunder that would rewrite the definition of logistical failure, Berthier's men did not capture wild hares. They purchased or acquired highly domesticated, hutch-raised rabbits from local farmers and breeding centers. This single administrative error ensured that the animals, rather than fleeing, viewed the field as their dinner party. The morning arrived, glorious and bright. Napoleon, flanked by his marshals and dignitaries, arrived in his carriage. His hunting party was arrayed for the slaughter, guns polished, expectations high. The scene must have been magnificent, the ultimate display of French imperial might confronting nature. Behind a long line of netting, the thousands of collected rabbits waited, confined in large cages. Napoleon took his place. He was ready to prove yet again his mastery over all things. A signal was given. The nets were dropped. The cages were opened. The field was instantly saturated with a sea of brown and gray fur. Thousands upon thousands of bunnies erupted. The plan was simple. The rabbits would bolt for the nearby woods, offering ample targets along the way. But domesticated rabbits possess instincts far different from their wild counterparts. Having been raised in captivity, they had been trained to associate large groups of humans with food. And here, before them, stood the largest gathering of humans they had ever seen. Instead of scattering, the furry phalanx pivoted. Their target was not escape, but the distinguished men standing ready with loaded guns. The emperor raised his rifle, perhaps mildly amused at the initial sight, but the amusement quickly vanished. They weren't fleeing, they were charging. The marshals stood frozen. The sheer scale of the advance was intimidating. The first wave crashed upon the feet of the hunting party, a living, squirming carpet. They were seeking sustenance, viewing the boots and breeches of the French elite as the source of their next meal. The emperor, the man who stared down the coalition of Europe, was suddenly being mobbed by tiny, desperate petitioners. Chaos erupted. The dignity of the moment dissolved into desperate squeaks and panicked shouts. The hunting rifles were almost useless. To shoot them required aiming downwards, risking hitting one's own feet. Some tried to shoo them away with sticks and hunting crops. It only provoked the assault further. This was no ordinary swarm. It was a tactical siege of fluff. The rabbits were relentless, driven by hunger and learned association. They were disciplined by their domestication. The situation rapidly deteriorated from a comical blunder into a genuine threat to imperial composure. As the perimeter was breached, the emperor himself was surrounded, his imperial footwear disappearing beneath a wave of fur. The marshals, seasoned veterans of countless campaigns, found themselves engaged in a battle for which they had no training. They attempted to use their military caps to scoop the rabbits away, but the sheer volume was overwhelming. The rabbits were not scared. They were demanding the tribute they felt entitled to. Napoleon shouted orders, but his commands, which had swayed armies, were ignored by this determined adversary. Marshal Berthier's brilliant logistics had delivered not quarry but reinforcements for the enemy. The moment of strategic retreat was at hand. There was no victory here, only survival. Napoleon ordered his staff to clear a path. The priority shifted from hunting to evacuation. But the rabbits were already inside the lines. They were flowing around and between the horses. The emperor scrambled back towards the safety of his imperial carriage, the high ground he desperately needed. The rabbits, however, followed. They treated the carriage like a gigantic mobile food dispenser. From the carriage steps, Napoleon witnessed his grand celebration become a nightmarish furry tide. The drivers lashed their whips, not at the horses, but at the ground, attempting to clear the advancing enemy. Even the horses were now compromised. The very engine of their escape was bogged down by relentless fluff. At this point of ultimate desperation, military protocol kicked in, ignoring the scale of the adversary. Napoleon, or perhaps his most panicked attendant, realized conventional means had failed. The situation demanded overwhelming force, a final, definitive solution. Someone, driven mad by the siege, pointed the celebratory cannon toward the ground. Imagine the scene, the mighty Emperor of France resorting to heavy artillery against domestic livestock. The roar of the blast ripped through the air, momentarily stunning the swarm. Did it stop them entirely? No, but it created a momentary breach, a window for tactical withdrawal. The horses bolted, terrified by the close-range explosion and the incessant, crawling tide beneath them. The imperial carriage roared away, leaving the scene of the most humiliating military retreat in history.
Napoleon had escaped, but the rabbits had won the field.
A definitive, if silent, victory for the domesticated forces of France. Back at the chateau, the emperor's fury was matched only by his profound embarrassment. The invincible commander had been forced to deploy heavy weaponry against deer animals. The story, despite the best efforts of the imperial staff, leaked out. It was too absurd, too perfect to keep secret. It was immediately seized upon by Napoleon's rivals, offering a much-needed moment of levity in the shadow of his dominance. The British press, in particular, delighted in skewering the man they dubbed Boney. The psychological impact of such a defeat cannot be overstated. It chipped away at the myth of infallibility. This incident serves as a crucial historical lesson. Even the greatest logistical mind can be undone by poor procurement. Had Berthier sourced wild hares, they would have followed their instinct and scattered away from the perceived threat. But the tame rabbits, conditioned for years, saw their owner figures and flocked immediately to the food source. It was a fatal misreading of the adversary's motivation.
This begs the question, how much did this minor disaster affect the psyche of the man who would later invade Russia?
Did this moment of comical failure contribute to a growing overconfidence? Or perhaps a creeping cynicism about his staff? The Battle of the Rabbits remains an important reminder that hubris is often preceded by absurdity. Though the emperor rebounded, conquering Spain and later taking Moscow, the image of him retreating from bunnies persisted. It offered a crucial humanization, a moment where the great general was reduced to a frightened victim. Imagine the conversation later that evening, the marshals trying desperately to offer military excuses. Sire, they exhibited unexpected aggression, a dense, low-profile tactical formation. The true genius of the rabbit army was their unrelenting belief in the source of their salvation. They were simply pursuing their programming, a perfect example of unintended consequences in logistics. This was a battle won not by strength or cunning, but by sheer, overwhelming, adorable hunger. The cannon blast, the final desperate measure, served only to underscore the depth of the humiliation. Napoleon, the master of artillery, had to deploy the Grand Army's pride against a pest problem. It stands as a testament to the unpredictable nature of history, where the gravest moments can be punctured by pure farce. And perhaps it reminds us that all leaders, no matter how powerful, are susceptible to the tiny, uncontrollable variables of life. The myth of Napoleon's invincibility died a swift and fluffy death that afternoon in 1807. The scars of this defeat were not military, but psychological, leading to endless ridicule. It's a bizarre footnote that encapsulates the hubris and eventual fallibility of the great emperor. Think about the sheer number of rabbits needed to generate such terror and force a full imperial retreat. It was a battle where the defensive strategy was rendered obsolete because the enemy refused to acknowledge fear. The emperor's ultimate shame wasn't being defeated, but having his glorious retreat paved by a blast of gunpowder. The cannon, a symbol of French military might, was used to silence a chorus of hungry squeaks. And that, historians agree, is why Napoleon Bonaparte was routed by an army of domesticated bunnies. A true story stranger than fiction, and certainly more embarrassing than any conventional battlefield loss. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into Napoleon's most ignoble day. If you found this historical absurdity fascinating, there is so much more history to uncover. Tell us in the comments, what is the most bizarre historical event you've ever heard? Our dedicated research team works tirelessly to bring these lost stories back to life. Your support ensures we can continue producing these high-quality historical analyses. We rely on viewers like you to help sustain our pursuit of forgotten truths. Before you leave this monument of imperial shame, don't forget to like and subscribe for more updates on history's most epic and often awkward moments.